My name is Chiquita Tillman, and I am a survivor of sex trafficking. And I am wanting to share my story because there is, a misconception that, when you're a victim of sex trafficking, it's because you were taken, like the movie, and that is so far from the truth. I was 15 years old, I was a runaway, and I was sold into sex trafficking. I grew up in a small town called Caruthersville, Missouri, very country, very, very small. And my mother was young when she had me. She was 15 when she had me. And so now that I know, she just did not want the responsibility, of raising a child. So I endured a lot of physical abuse, a lot of sexual molestations with her boyfriends. And, I would go to, like my grandmother, various relatives to let them know what was going on, but no one, wanted to help or didn't know how to help. Back in that time, my grandparents and stuff, they kind of like swept stuff under the rug, didn't really want to deal with certain things. So I continued to endure these types of behaviors from my mother's boyfriends and from my mother. One particular boyfriend that she had, he was, living in the house, and he was molesting me, crawling into my bed while she slept across the hallway. And I remember telling her that he was in my bed, and she slapped me across the face, and she told me that I was lying, while he sat there and he laughed. And so she never believed me. She never took my side. She would always, take his side. And so one day she came to me and she told me that they were getting married and they were moving to another state, and that I was not allowed to go with them, and that I was going to go stay with my father. And this was a man that I did not know, but I had no choice. So I went to go stay with my dad. I was 12 years old at this time. I went to go stay with my dad and found out he was an alcoholic. He was very abusive. And it was just, going from one abusive situation to another abusive situation. And my father had a young friend who he allowed to come to the house. And one particular day, he came to the house. My father was not there, and he forced himself upon me. And I was 12 years old. And when I told my father, that his friend was trying to penetrate me and was trying to have sex with me at 12 years old, my father, he just kind of swept it under the rug like it was a joke, or like he wasn't serious. He was playing. And it was like nobody would listen to my cry. Nobody would come to my help. So I decided that I didn't want to live anymore. So at 12 years old, I took a full bottle of pills, pain pills, and I lay down expecting to die. And at the time, it was just my sister. She was 4 years younger than me. She was 8. I was 12. And she came into the room to try and wake me up, and she couldn't wake me up. And so she called her mother at work. Her mother came home, got me to the hospital, and the doctor said, if she hadn't gotten here within the next 5 minutes, she wouldn't be here. So after they pumped my stomach, and the doctor was trying to talk to me, and he was like, well, why are you so distraught? Why do you want to kill yourself? And at that time, my father walked through the door, and the doctor took one look, and he was like, oh, never mind, I see. Because my father was so mean and angry. He was more pissed off of the fact that he had to take off work to come see about his child. He was losing money. So the situation, didn't get any better. My father was still so abusive till my stepmother ended up leaving him and taking my sister with her. She wanted to take me as well, but he wouldn't allow it. Even though he didn't want me, just to spite her, he wouldn't let me go. So I ended up really kind of acting out, and I went down to my grandmother's, and then my aunt, my mother's sister, she had a little boy, and so she asked if I wanted to come stay with her. So I was like, yeah. Now by this time I'm 13, so I go stay with my aunt. She has a live-in boyfriend. I'm thinking everything is good, you know, because her boyfriend was a nice guy, or so I thought. And one day I was outside, and he was going to the store, and he asked if I wanted to go to the store. What child does not want to go to the store and get candy? So I went to the store with him, and while I was in the car on the way back, he molested me. He molested me, and he told me not to tell anyone. And so I'm fearful. I'm afraid now, because, you know, this is happening all over again. And I told my aunt. I went against what he said not to do, and I told her. And just like my mother, she believed him. She believed him over me. And he was so angry, you know, that I told, and he told her that he wanted me out of the house. And so they made up a story and told me that my mother wanted me to come visit her, but that I could come back. So I was under the assumption that I was going to go visit my mother and then be able to come back to my aunt's. Well, that wasn't the case. Once I got to my mother's, that's when I found out that, you know, I couldn't go back. My mother was mad because my mother was back because she was upset because I was back in her life. And she did not want me in her household. This man that she was now with was not the same man that she left me for. This was a different guy. And he was very nice, but he thought I was her stepchild. She told him that I was her stepchild. And he asked me one day, well, how do you like living with your stepmom? And I said, who? And he said my mother's name. And I said, she's not my stepmom, she's my mom. And he said, well, no, you know, she was just there, you know, when you were a baby with your dad, and she helped raise you. And I said, no, she's my mom. And I told him to ask her for my birth certificate. And that's when he found out that I was really her biological child. So my mother really became abusive after that. She just hated the fact that I was, you know, in her world. And, you know, she would make me sleep on the floor. She would lock me out of the apartment where I couldn't come in. And so I would sleep outside a lot. I would just, you know, I'd have nowhere to go. And I ended up, like, you know, staying at different neighbors sometimes. And it just got to the point where the abuse was just too much. I decided that I was going to leave. So I left on the Greyhound bus, and I went to Los Angeles, California. Now, I don't know anything about Los Angeles, but I knew that I had an aunt that lived there. Or I heard that an aunt lived there, my grandmother's sister. So I figured once I got there, I'll look her up. Well, once I got to Los Angeles, I didn't know anything about directory assistance or how to find anyone. And so I ended up wandering around downtown Los Angeles, you know, for some days. I ran out of money. I didn't have any food. I was hungry. I was sleepy. I was cold. And this young guy approached me, and we started talking, and he offered to help me find my aunt, and he offered, you know, a place to sleep. So I went with him to his house, and he gave me some food, and he gave me a bed to sleep in. Well, that next morning he crawled into that same bed and he raped me. And after he raped me, he told me that we had to go, and I had to go with him, And I didn't know where I was. I didn't know anything about this city. And so I went with him. We went to this apartment, and there was a black guy and a white girl there. And I asked if I could use their restroom. So I went into the restroom. When I came out, that's when I found out that the guy had sold me to this pimp. And the pimp, I became kind of defiant. And so the pimp beat me and he raped me to let me know that he was in control. And that night I had to go out on the stroll with the girl. She had to teach me the ropes. And I was beaten, very badly that night because I allowed the Johns to control the situation. Whereas, you're supposed to, get the money up front, and you're supposed to get them off as quickly as possible so that you can continue working. Well, I allowed the John to control the situation. So, it took longer, and possibly, missed out on other money. Basically, is, the mindset he had. So I was beaten. That was a lesson that I learned that night, to not do that again, not to allow anyone to control the situation. So I was on the streets with this pimp for several months. And one night they did a prostitution sweep where they gathered up all the prostitutes that they saw. And I was new to them. And so they wanted to, scare me or make an example, or they arrested me. They took me to a women's jail. I was 15 years old in a women's jail. And I just saw some things that, just horrific things. And the next morning, they called my name to go to court. And while we were there, we were in a holding room, and, some of the ladies were explaining to me the process. And when they called my name, I was happy that they called my fake name, because had they called my real name, they would have known, that I was 15, and they would have sent me back to my mother. So they called my fake name, dismissed the case. So I ended up going back to the jail to get my belongings and to process out. As I'm sitting outside of the jail, a young Caucasian girl came and sat next to me and started talking to me. She had recently been released from jail as well. So she was out waiting. We were talking, and she was like, I'll help you find your aunt. You can come stay with me. And I'm not thinking anything because she's a girl. And I go home with her, and there's 3 pimps in this house. And so now I'm taking control. I'm taking, control over by her pimp. And this guy was worse, way worse than the first pimp. We had to sleep in one room, all in the same bed. We couldn't use the restroom without him being there. We couldn't take a bath without him being there. We had to get up every morning at 6 a.m. to take a bath. We had to get dressed. The limousine took us to the stroll, which is Sunset Boulevard. We worked from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. every single day. He had men to watch us so we couldn't run. They knew where we were at all times. I endured a lot of, physical abuse, rapes by Johns, guns held to my head, knives to my throat. We had to meet up at noon at this hamburger joint every day. That's where we ate every day. I hated it for years afterwards. I don't even think I've eaten there. But for every day we had to meet there. We had to hand over the money that we made, up until that point. And I remember one day I had a John who, held a gun to my head, and he robbed me of all of my money, and he raped me. And when we met up and I told him what happened, I got beat because he didn't believe me. He didn't believe that I was raped and robbed. And so I had to make up for the money that I had lost or that was stolen, and I better have that portion as well, because we had to have a certain amount every day. It was during this time that I became pregnant by the pimp, but I didn't know I was pregnant. I just knew I was very sickly, and throwing up, but I was so tiny. I was under 100 pounds, so you really couldn't see a belly or anything like that. I was trying to hide one day in a store, and because I was so sick, and there was a security guard in the store, and the security guard, he was watching me. He didn't work there, but he was there. He kept watching me, and I thought that he wanted a date, and I was just thinking, there's just no way I'm so sick. I can't perform right now. And he left out of the store, and I waited a little bit, and then I left out. And when I walked out, he was standing by his car, and he said, can I see you? And can I talk to you for a minute? And I was like, no. And I started walking off, and I heard a voice so clear say, trust him. So I turned back around, and I went to him, and I started talking to him like he was a customer, like I was trying to set up a date, but I was letting him know that they're watching me. They're all around. I can't run. And he was like, just meet me on, the street. He named the street. Meet me there at 5 o'clock, and I'll help you get away. And I held on to that hope, all day. And I continued, working, and, and I wanted to share also, I've had undercover cops that did not help me, when I told them the situation. Instead, they wanted me to pleasure them, give them a blowjob or something, just to keep me from going to jail. So there was a distrust with me towards cops, because it was more than one that I tried to reach out to for help, and they wanted sex instead. So when 5 o'clock came around, I saw the limousine coming to pick us up, and it was on the opposite side of the street. And then the girl came, and she said, it's time to go. And I lied, and I said, well, I have one more, customer around the corner. And she said, well, hurry up. And so when I got around the corner, I just took off running. And I heard someone go, Lisa, because that was my street name, Lisa. And I kept running, because I thought it was his, henchmen, the guys that he had to watch us. I thought they were coming after me, and I was like, they're just going to have to kill me, because I'm not going back. They're just going to have to kill me right here. And I kept running, and I heard my name again, and I looked to my left, and it was the security guard. He actually came back, and I jumped in his car, and he took me to a motel, and he went and got me some food, and he said, stay here tonight, and I'm going to bring my mom in the morning. Well, I didn't think he was going to do that. I honestly didn't really think anything of it, other than I felt safe at that time because I was away from the pimp. But I also knew that this pimp was not going to just let me leave without looking for me. So I was still scared, but at that moment I felt safe, and I went to sleep. The next morning he came. Now I found out later that, when he went home, he told his mom and grandmother about me. And his mother was like, leave her out there. She's probably hardcore. She's probably this or that. And he said, well, you taught me that if I saw someone who needed help, to help them. So because they taught him that, they couldn't go back on their word. So on what they taught him. So they came the next morning with him. And it was his mother and his grandmother. And they was like, you're just a baby, because even though I was the age that I was also, undernourished. I was very skinny, so I looked young, a lot younger than what I was. And at this time, I was almost 17. So I went home with them. They took me home. That's when the grandmother told me I was pregnant. I had just a tiny, tiny pouch. You couldn't even tell. And I just did not believe it, And they took me to the doctor, and I was far. I was far along. And they took me in. We ended up going to court. My mother told them while I was standing there, I don't want her. Y'all can have her. And, you know, that really hurt, hearing your mother say that she didn't want you and that, someone else can have you. And so they adopted me, and I I went through a lot of, mental challenges after that. But I want to say I was about 6 months, 6.5 months pregnant when my water broke in the middle of the night. And, I was like, I can't stop peeing, not knowing that, my water broke. But they came in, we got to the hospital, and, my baby had died. And they put me in a room, and they told me, when you feel the contractions, to ring the nurse. Well, I didn't. When I felt the baby coming, I just delivered the baby myself. And it was a boy. I named him Caleb. And I was in the hospital for a few days because, I had ran a high fever. They had to end up giving me a blood transfusion. And it was a lot. And so mentally, I dealt with a lot after, being rescued off the streets. I went through a lot of emotional ups and downs. I was suicidal. I dealt with a lot of depression. I was depressed a lot, and I was acting out. I became an alcoholic. I started drinking to numb the pain. I started, just doing all kinds of stuff, to just try and cope. And, a lot of people think that, once you're rescued, that's it. That's all there is. But that's a whole nother journey. Once you're rescued, you're mentally unstable, emotionally unstable. There's a lot that you have to deal with. And I didn't deal with any of it until I was an adult, like in my 30s, is when I finally realized I needed help. And so I went to a counselor that specializes in trauma. And let me tell you, that was the best thing that I could have done for my life, was to get counseling and to deal with, the deep-rooted issues that I never dealt with. And, one thing that I came to realize, that I was a child and I was not responsible for the things that had happened to me. Because a lot of times we take on that responsibility, and we shouldn't. But going through counseling, I learned to love myself, because I had no self-worth. I was damaged, and I had to learn how to, process everything that had happened to me, the rapes and the physical abuse, just being sold like a piece of meat. And it's horrific. It's a hard journey, and it's hard even after you get off the streets. It's hard, And so I wanted to share because, after me going through my healing process, I was able to go back to my parents. I was able to talk, things out with them. I was able to forgive them. and let them know that they were forgiven, and by knowing that, they were truly forgiven, we formed, a relationship. It wasn't, a close bond, but, we could be around each other and, and laugh and, have a good time, but my adopted family is my family. And, but I just wanted to share and say that, just because you go through this horrific lifestyle, you can become anything that you want to. You can do whatever it is that you want to do. I'm now an advocate against sex trafficking, human trafficking. I own my own business called Ruby's Inc. I'm an author. I wrote a book. It's called I Am a Ruby, Not a Sapphire. I've done a lot of things. I've also gotten a bachelor's degree in Christian counseling. So you can have a productive life after, sex trafficking. Doesn't mean that you can remain stuck there. I just wanted to share because I know that there's so many that's out there that's like me that's still stuck because they haven't not gotten the counseling or the help that they need. And I'm just encouraging you to please reach out to a counselor that specializes in trauma so that you can move forward in your life. And, to teenagers and children, just be careful of, what you're doing online, because, predators are pretending to be children, or you have, people are pretending to be producers or agents to try and get you to lure you away from your home. Just be mindful of that, and, parents, please listen to your children, your girls, your boys. If they're telling you that someone is molesting them or touching them inappropriately or, doing sexual things to them, please listen. Please, please. I'm imploring that you listen to them because that's how it starts. It starts with the abuse in the home. Kids, they can't take it anymore. They run away and then they become subject to, traffickers, predators out there on the streets. So I just want to say thank you for allowing me to share my story. If there's any questions, if there's anything that you want to know from me, please feel free to ask. You can reach me. My website is I am a Ruby to you. That's the number 2, the letter U.com. And you can email me at iamaruby2you@gmail.com. And that is I am a Ruby to you, the number 2, the letter U@gmail.com. And my Instagram, I'm under I am a Ruby. Facebook, I'm under author Chiquita Tillman. And I am just honored and grateful that I am at a place where I am healed, I am whole. I am what healed looks like. And I am grateful. You can be whatever it is that you want to be after sex trafficking. Thank you. I appreciate you. God bless.